All right, round two of makeup placement. So now we're gonna be talking about blush, bronzer, and contour. Oh, and highlight as well. Now, something that you wanna keep in mind is that it can be really difficult to layer, liquids and creams over powders. So if you go in and you set your face with a powder and then you go in with a powder bronzer and a powder contour, but you wanna apply a cream blush, there's potential for, weird mixing, cakiness, removing product, and kind of like the moisture in that cream blush breaking down the rest of those products. So you want to keep that in mind. So for me personally, I like to use a powder bronzer. I like to use a cream stick contour, and I like to use a cream blush. And then as far as highlight, I could go either way. I could use a liquid, I could use a powder. The order that you do your contour, bronzer, and blush is really up to you, and it all mostly depends on the formulation, in my personal opinion. I also like to keep in mind sort of like how you're shaping the face. It's kind of like painting. So contour is obviously a shadow. It's supposed to go underneath parts of your face, right? So to me, it makes sense that I'm like creating sort of like the building the bone structure before I'm applying the colors on top, like the blush, like the bronzer, and like the highlight. So contouring is not something that I personally like to do afterwards. However, if you are someone who likes to use a powder contour and you're trying not to go in with too much, saving it for last can actually be really useful. So you go in with your blush and your bronzer to create nice warmth to the face, and then like warmth and dimension. And then you're like, oh, I kind of want to add like a little bit of a detail to the cheekbone. Then you can go in with like a really light hand and contour your cheekbone without applying like way too much. Because sometimes whatever you do first, you can apply like a lot without really realizing that like when it all comes together, it's too overwhelming for the face. This is a lot of information. I hope that it's making sense. So as always, I think my biggest tip would be like start small and build slowly, because you can always go back in, you know what I mean? And build it up. So what I like to do is contour first. So I'm gonna use my Fenty Matchstick in Amber because I know I'm gonna be applying a bronzer and a blush, and that's going to add structure to the face, structure and depth to the face. I don't feel the need to use a ton of contour, but I like to kind of like do a little bit of manipulation, you know what I mean? So I'm going to apply a tiny bit, literally right there, because I can blend. I like to lift the eyes a little bit, and then the jawline. So this is how I like to start blending out and creating shadows. So this is literally like defining the bones, right? It's literally like drawing the skeleton right now, which is why I personally find this to be the easiest to do first and then layer on top of it. Okay, so I have my, what is it called? Contour on. But keep in mind that if like, say I was using a powder contour and a powder bronzer, then maybe I would do my cream blush first, then go in with my bronzer or my contour or whatever. Rude. Okay, so now I'm going to apply my cream blush. So I'm gonna use my Dominique Cosmetics blush and my Refer number 4 brush. What is he doing? Why is he yelling?
Hey, sorry, are you downstairs?
Right. So now I finished my cream products. Those are all the cream products that I'm going to use. So this is when I would go in and set my face. So I would set my under eyes with powder, set my face, like any area of my face that I want to set with a powder. If I was going to go in with a liquid highlight, which sometimes I do, especially if I'm going for a more natural look, I typically use my Auric Morganite highlight. What I would do is, and I do this anyway, but what I would do is try to maintain the powder in the areas where that isn't going to go. So for the most part, I like to set underneath my eyes, and sometimes I'll use I'd like a translucent powder to set between my forehead and like around this area because I can tend to get like a little oily. But if I know I'm going to be using a cream or powder highlight, cream or liquid highlight, then I'm not going to be taking powder in this area because I don't want there to be that cakiness. As soon as you start layering like liquids or creams on top of powders, it can mix together. The moisture in that product ends up breaking down the powder, and it can end up looking like cakey or like it breaks up, and it just doesn't look good, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to apply a little bit of my powder underneath my eyes, and I like to focus this, literally just right here in the area where I don't want it to crease. This is a little bit of a brightening powder, so I like to brighten the sides of my nose, and then I'll take whatever's left over around my nose so that doesn't break up. But I'm leaving the cheekbones nice and clean, which is something that I do whether I'm using a powder highlight or not, or a liquid highlight or whatever. I'm just gonna leave it like that because I actually really like a sort of a dewy skin look. And my skin has been more dry, so I don't really feel like I need to apply a setting powder to the rest of my face. However, now I'm going to apply my bronzer. Now, the only reason that I apply my bronzer after my blush is because I like to use a cream blush, and my bronzer is a powder bronzer. If I was using a cream bronzer, I would probably actually go in with that before my blush. But that's why I'm saying, like, there are so many different ways that you can do it. It's really just your preference. But these are the things that you should keep in mind if you're feeling like you don't really know what to start with, or you feel like whatever order you're putting them in just isn't really working for you. So now I'm gonna go in with my Nars San Juan bronzer, which is a powder. And I'm using a big fluffy brush. I think this is a Japonesque or Nars, I never remember. And since this is a powder, I'm going to just kind of like pat this in the areas where I want to warm up. And this is going to kind of like set those areas, which is why I didn't feel the need to go in with a translucent powder. And it's going to add the warmth. Now, for my cheekbones, I like to kind of like go underneath my blush, sort of like between my blush and where I contoured. So applying it around there, bringing it up a little bit onto the temple, and sweeping a little bit onto the cheeks. And if you feel like you have, you want to maintain coverage, then patting is a really good way to do it. You can also sweep, but sometimes that can create skipping. You might notice that I'm applying the majority of the product like here, kind of like around my cheekbone. And then I'm taking whatever's left over like onto the cheek and up, so that I don't have like a gigantic amount of powder there. So if I were going to go in with a liquid highlight, sometimes I would do that before my blush, sometimes I would do that before I apply my bronzer. It kind of depends on the state of my skin. But I'm applying a really light amount, which is another reason why I didn't use a translucent powder, because especially if I'm going to be using a liquid highlight, I don't want a big like buildup of powder in that area for all of the reasons that I mentioned. Now, when it comes to highlight, I obviously don't have my brows on, I don't have my eyes on, I don't have my mascara on. Highlight is something that I personally prefer to do after I do my eyeshadow, but before I do my eyebrows and my mascara. And the reason for that is because those like little flecks of glitter can get pretty much all over the place. So if you have your brows like laminated and then, you go and you do all this work, you go in and apply your highlight to your brow bone, maybe just above your brow or something, and little specks can kind of like fall down and they get all of your eyebrows, all over your mascara, and I don't like that. So typically what I'll do is finish off my eyeshadow, then go in with those like details in the inner corner, the brow bone, around my cheekbones and all of that, and then I will go in with the finishing touches like my brows, my mascara, and my lips. But that's really only something that you have to worry about if you're using a powder highlight, particularly if you're using a loose highlight, because that stuff just is in the air, You kind of want to think in terms of like the layering as far as like what do you want to show up the most. So one of the reasons that I don't put my concealer on after my blush is because I like to bring my blush like up here and around my cheeks. So if I do all of that work and then I apply my concealer and I blend it out, this area ends up being like super highlighted and I lose all of that color in those areas. So it kind of takes like a little bit of trial and error. It depends on what you're going for exactly. But I hope that this helped, this little 2-part series. And let me know if there are like pretty much any other, I don't know, in what order you should do whatever for the face. And I'll do them. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.